What are you worth? If you don't know, Elizabeth Warren, presidential candidate, has a book out to tell you all you're worth.
You are listening to Wealth Talks, and today we're going to talk about what you are really worth. And it's not what all the gurus and the experts talk about today. It's not even what the politicians talk about. In fact, this book out by Elizabeth Warren, her book is entitled All Your Worth, makes a budget plan for you. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today and what it means for you.
Well, you hear us talk often about the 10-20-70 plan or principle or rule that George Clason made popular in the book, The Richest Man in Babylon in 1933. Well, Warren has a new percentage breakdown, and it's called the 50-20-30 budget plan in her book, All Your Worth. And she says that you should spend 50% of your income paying for things like housing, transportation, groceries, clothing, utilities, insurance premiums, and minimum debt payments on your credit cards and unsecured debt. Then she says that you should pay 20% of your paycheck should be used on contributing to your 401k or 403b plans, your IRA, your mutual fund investments, emergency funds in your bank account. Maybe purchasing stocks and bonds and paying more than your minimal required payments on your credit card.
And people call that saving, but as you see, most people get this confused. It's really investing that they're talking about. And so when you're thinking about whether you're saving or investing, it's important that you draw the distinction between those two. You may have heard us talk about this before, but saving is completely different from investing. Savings is guaranteed, investing is not. In fact, even the possibility of return in an investment is not guaranteed. It's actually possible to lose money.
Well, John, I was reading Peter Lynch the other day, and he says savings is investing. And so what we're trying to do here is change that paradigm and say, no, savings is different than keeping money.
Yes.
And so we highlight that over and over again, but we traditionally think of savings as keeping, but savings and keeping aren't even the same because, as Peter Lynch says, savings equals investments.
Yeah. Now, is there going to be some crossover? Are you going to ever take some of the money that you have saved to make an investment? Sure, you might, but you should always keep a portion of your savings guaranteed, money that you are keeping that is secure against that risk of loss.
That's right. Well, if you spend 50% on those things and 20% on your investments, then Warren says that the rest of the 30% is for you. Entertainment, vacations, eating out, Netflix, coffee houses, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that budget might work for someone who has kind of made it already, who's in the 1%, who maybe someone who doesn't have as high of expenses as most American families, but most Americans are spending more than that in their household, just for the necessities.
Well, the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics says that housing, including utilities, costs 27% of a person's budget of the median household in America today. We spend 10% on food, over 5.5% on transportation, a little less than 2.5% on clothing, almost 7% on healthcare, and almost 9% on health insurance.
Wow.
And automobile insurance and things like that. That comes out to be over 60% of the budget. So already Warren's idea that you can only spend 50% on those necessities is off kilter. Mm-hmm. She's more than 10% behind the ball. And that's going to put you behind the ball. But what do politicians really want? But us to depend on government instead of our own savings and investments.
And how well have they done at managing the federal budget?
Yeah.
It's going negative. It's going into debt faster. So you have to look at where this advice is coming from, and it's not necessarily great advice.
Well, the good news is that long before Senator Warren lied to get into Harvard as a teacher, as a Native American, and earned $400,000 a year and sells her textbooks there for hundreds of dollars, the 10-20-70 rule was around. And it's been proven time and time again that it works. And that means that we should take 70% of our income, not 50% of it, to cover our basic needs: property taxes, charitable giving, housing costs, student loan costs, transportation costs, grocery, clothing, utilities, insurance premiums. And that would include term insurance, auto insurance, and health insurance. Entertainment costs, if it's affordable, and then paying more than the minimum required payments on our non-secured or credit card debt. That is making sure that we're taking care of the basic needs, whereas Warren's system already puts you 10%
behind starting out.
What the U.S. Department of Statistics and Labor tells us is being spent on those things.
Yeah. Now the 10-20-70 here, this is a guideline. You may have heard us talk about that before. This is a guideline. It's not a strict, hard, fast rule. You do, if you're spending more than 70% on life's necessities, though, then you do want to take a closer look and see, is that really something that you need? Or all those things
you have to question if it's a need or just a desire or a want. And, of course, this is going to leave then 20% of your take-home to conquer and attack the non-secured debt that you may have in your life or the credit card debt. Now, you may not have any of that, and that's good. That still means that we should be living off the 70%. And that just means you're going to be able to keep more if you don't have unsecured debt or credit card debt.
Exactly. So if you can get your living expenses down to 50% of your income, great. That gives you more to save or more to do something else that you want to do with that money. The key here is that you don't want to start on a plan with unrealistic expectations. That can be discouraging right off the bat and get you off to a bad start. Start with something that you know is comfortable and affordable, that has been proven time and over again. And then as your income builds, then you can then your living expenses, they don't have to rise to meet your income all the time. If you can get them down to 50% as you make more, then hey, that's all the more that you get to keep.
Of course, you may be listening and saying, well, my income isn't going to increase. I'm on a fixed budget. I get a salary, and that's where it's at, and I'm going to be this way the rest of my life. But the thing is that if you will follow the 10-20-70 rule and get your life in order, then you will be able to keep more of what you make instead of throwing away or losing the money. And John, you have created an ideal piece of software that helps people find out where their budget is in comparisons to the 10-20-70 so that they can get things balanced and start being able to keep instead of lose most of the money they're making.
That's right. It's a simple worksheet that you can download right to your computer, or you can use it online using Google Sheets if you don't have Excel on your computer. I'll put the link in the resources here for you today. It's called the 10-20-70 tool. You put in what you're spending on a monthly basis and what you're making, gives you a target 10-20-70 model, and it shows you how you're actually matching up based on what you're spending. You can put in annual expenses, monthly expenses, or anything in between. I think there's even some weekly or biweekly expenses on there that you can put in. So you can make it really as fine-tuned, as personalized as you want, and then save a copy of that plan, work towards those goals, reevaluate in a few months or a year and see how you're doing, and make sure that you're keeping on target towards where you want to be.
And of course, we're here to help you get that budget balanced according to the 10-20-70 principle so that you can stop losing most of the money that you make and start being able to keep more of it so that you have something that you can rely on when your income is cut because of retirement or for other reasons that happen in life. Now, here's the thing. We're doing some research right now, writing a new book, The Prescription of Wealth, how to stop losing money and keep more of the money you make. And in that, we're finding some really interesting statistics, and that is that Americans today spend $122 billion on unsecured credit card debt, just on the interest. That's not the principal payments they're paying.
That's a lot.
$122 billion, and when you computate that down, you find that that's over $4,000 a person.
Wow.
That's an interest. on
huge.
unsecured debt. That's not including student loan debt. That's not including a mortgage debt. That's not including a debt for automobile or transportation costs.
Because those are secured debts.
Those are secured dets.
Right.
This is unsecured consumer debt. And
Credit cards,
credit
lines of
cards,
credit.
or personal lines of credit.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. And so if you take that kind of money, what would happen if you were able to keep that kind of money instead of passing it on to somebody else? Mm-hmm. And this is something that Elizabeth Warren's book, All Your Worth, just completely ignores. And it's what the Perpetual Wealth Code and here at Life Benefits we focus on. Because a long time ago, Nelson Nash said when he was teaching the infinite banking concept, if you can save up enough money and just pay cash for everything, you win hands down because nobody else is doing that in the country. Mm-hmm. However, we've got to have a place to keep that interest that you're throwing away right now. Now, for us, we didn't have that kind of consumer debt. And so it didn't make sense to me why using a reservoir of money that I had kept that was making an internal rate of return, why I would ever want to leverage that and have to pay interest was beyond me when I first heard Nelson. Okay? But it makes sense because if you have interest compounding for you, then you can, and that interest is not reduced when you leverage your principal, then you can actually make money borrowing at a higher interest rate than what you're saving at.
That's interesting. And for this to work, you have to consider the time factor that's
It's
involved.
all about time.
Always the time.
Time is money.
It is.
And that's something that we sometimes forget. Time is money. And so here we're talking about the time value of money. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
So if you can borrow at that higher rate, save at a lower rate over a longer period of time, even for the same amount of time, mathematically, you will see the difference there. But if you consider every dollar working the complete time, then you have to think about all the years that you're not using that money and how is it compounding for you, even if it's at that lower rate. How is it compounding for you the whole time, not just the time that you're using that money?
That's correct.
And that's something that most people completely miss. You have to think about the time that you're not using that money just as much as you do the time you are using it. So let's break this down and make it really easy here. This 10% of the 10, 20, 70 that we're talking about here, that or maybe part of the 20% as well, that 4,000 some odd dollars that people are paying in credit card interest, that should be redirected to a place where you have control over it. We call it savings or keeping that money, and we're using participating whole life insurance. When you use that as your financial tool, that when you pay a premium with it, that starts compounding over time. That's going to be compounding for you the whole time, the rest of your life, as long as you continue that policy. When you access that money, there is an interest rate to pay to the insurance company on it. That interest rate is a higher rate, right? Higher the rate than what the internal rate of return is in the policy. But you're not going to be using that money your whole lifetime. When you pay that loan back, now it is still compounding at whatever the internal rate of return is. So somewhere maybe 3-4% over a lifetime.
Yes.
When you access and use that money, you're just paying the interest rate to the insurance company. Maybe it's 5-6%. You're just paying that for the time that you have the loan outstanding. You have not broken the compounding curve that 3 or 4% is building for your whole lifetime. And that's a key that a lot of people, you have to consider this as you're planning your financial future.
So let's talk about that compounding curve a little bit more, John, because we've mentioned it in the past. But let's say that a 19-year-old starts saving $2,000 a year, and they do that until they're 25 for 7 years.
7 years,
so
$2,000 a year. All right.
And they're earning 10% on that. And at age 67, they're going to have almost $1,040,000, just shy of that. But someone else decides they want to go to college. And so they go to college, and they can't say because they're not working. And at 25, they graduate, they get out, and they start saving $2,000 a year as well.
All right. So the other guy saved it for 7 years. So what if they save it for 7 years?
Well, they actually have to save it every year until they're 67 to come anywhere close to what the fellow started at age 19.
All the way to when?
Till 67. So they have to save 42 years of $2,000.
And the other guy just 7?
He only saved 7 because when you take the compounding effect, this compounding curve that you're talking about, it shifts it way to the right when you delay savings or keeping money. And so what happens is the fellow that started at age 25 and saved $2,000 through age 67 ends up with about $36,000 more than the fellow that stopped saving at age 25.
That's not that much more.
And yet, he has only compounded his savings, or what he's kept, by a little over 12%.
Wow.
Whereas the fellow that went from age 19 to 25 and has $36,000 less has compounded his contributions by almost 75%.
That's astounding. You know, when you're using a high interest rate like 10%, we can really see this difference accentuated here. But it works at the lower percentages as well, just to a lesser degree.
Now, we have to understand that we're not advocating just to save 7 years when you're young.
Exactly.
If this fellow had saved $2,000 just like the other fellow,
how much would he have?
Oh, I didn't do the math on that, but it's astronomical.
Okay, $2,000 for over 40 years. Yeah, it's going to be a lot higher.
Yeah. So this is the thing: is we've got to start keeping money, keeping part of that 10%. You've got to keep it in a place that's not vulnerable to market conditions. Elizabeth Warren's system has you putting it in a 401k, an IRA, mutual funds, things that fluctuate with the market. And as we've seen, you can start all over again when the market corrects, or literally all over. What does that do to the compounding curve? It shifts it again to the right, because now just a 7-year lapse in savings here was huge. What happens if you're 50 and you lose 40% of your portfolio?
You don't have near the time to make it up. You'll never make it up.
You don't have the time to make it up.
Yeah.
And so, and we've talked about that again in the past podcast as well. But let's just say if we can keep that $4,100 or $4,200 or whatever it is that people are paying in interest, and just earn a nominal rate of interest of 6% in 20 years, that's almost $155,000.
That adds up.
It adds up. And that's going to someone else right now if you're following Warren Buffett's, not Warren Buffett, but Elizabeth Warren's all you're worth. And so we have to stop and say, is that all you're worth? Or what are you really worth? What are you really worth? If you just think you're worth $155,000, if that's all you're worth, or what do you really want to find out what you're worth? That's the key difference here. And so we've got to make sure that we're using participating whole life insurance, because even if you had that $155,000 that you're sending to someone else and you put it in an investment, you're still going to end up paying 2% or so in taxes on that, and that's going to drop that down to just a little over $110,000 for you. So our mentality, your mentality of, this is all I'm worth, or what are you really worth? And when we use the participating whole life insurance policy, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Now the methods here that Warren is promoting are mainstream methods.
They're typical.
Typical methods, yeah. Everyone's promoting them. And when you look at who's really promoting them, it's the investment companies behind the whole scene. Everyone's talking today about conflicts of interest in the financial industry. They're saying that people should be licensed as, quote, fiduciary to be able to recommend investments to someone that they would recommend for themselves. And the problem as we see it, that all sounds really nice on paper and everything and in the news. But what happens when the conflict of interest is at a higher level, if the investment companies who are promoting all of it and controlling the conversation around building wealth and investing, they're telling you basically that the investments are the only way to go because it's the typical way to go.
Well, I was reading an article today that said that the average congressperson, when they're elected to Congress, their net worth increases by $1.3 million a year. After they've been elected.
They're not getting paid that much.
They're getting paid on $175,000 a year. So where does that come from? It comes from K Street, where people are lobbying these people, and the people that are lobbying them are the ones that want to control your money, the Wall Street and K Street and all these people. And so there is a connection there. Obviously it is. We know that it is. We know that the governmental systems, the centralized system they set up, have failed time and time again. And that's why we really encourage people to look at life insurance, because it's decentralization. It's still regulated by the states, not the federal government. Gives us a little bit more control of what we're keeping. And it allows us to, like you said earlier, John, to continue to earn that compound rate of return while we have access to the insurance company's money to do the things that we need to do in life, to invest, to risk, and to assume risk for higher gains.
Yeah, and that's really why it's so important for you to use, to put on your thinking cap. Think through the different options, where people's conflict of interest might be. And so you can make the decisions of what to do with your finances to keep and protect what you have saved, so it's really there for you in the future instead of patting someone else's pocket down the road.
So if you're listening to this and you're struggling with keeping any of your paycheck or less than 10%, really you owe it to yourself to check out the 10/20/70 data sheets, to fill those out. We'll be happy to look at those with you and review it with you, because you need to find out what you're really worth, not what all you're worth.
You are listening to Wealth Talks, where we talk about solutions for your prosperity. Have a wonderful week.